by no means, when I did put that up there as well, my intent when I put that up there, just to be clear, was not that I felt like we needed to list out all the documents teachers should use, because I think that there's multiple that can be picked. But that if there are some of important or that are influential that we do want to emphasize, that would be the way to do it, to kind of pull it out a little bit more than the way it is currently in our document, which is a bullet point, and it can get muddied in there because of all the detail that's in there. So I like that format is what I was saying.
If my bias might not be the right word, I think when you mentioned important, relevant, highly influential documents, something I think is very address is valuable, is important for the public that we're talking about. I mean, bias is the right word, but the other documents do need to be referenced and brought in.
And there's going to be bias in any document that we pick. I mean, let's be honest about that. But I think what Larry
there's a focus and there's a purpose for it. But again, bias has a pejorative sense that I don't think it's quite the right one to use.
Yeah, effective viewer balance, like to show, because students need to understand both sides of the conference.
Absolutely.
Even if they
To read the Federalist Papers without reading the anti-Federalist Papers is nuts. You don't get the full meaning of either.
Or how they were responding. So and what I looked at the seminal documents also was the fact that they were primary source documents. And we're trying more and more to lead students to use those primary source documents. And also, one of the things you brought up, I think it was Kevin, about having a cultural literacy. And so we do recommend those documents. Then everyone across Missouri has read the Gettysburg Address, has read Eisenhower's letter that he never sent after D-Day, that type of stuff that that we decide might be good for students to know. So
I would just throw out a caution. One of the criticisms of the Common Core that I heard was that there were resources that were recommended within the core. And I think we need to be careful about that, because then we get back to some people not agreeing that that's a seminal document, as ridiculous as it may sound in here. But in English, for example, when certain pieces of literature are being recommended to support a unit of instruction, it got very controversial. It got to people saying, you should leave that decision up to the district, period, on what they feel like seminal documents should be. I'm not on that side. I think we should recommend to teachers, based on what I said yesterday, but I think we're always going to be open to that kind of criticism from people. So we need to be sensitive when we reach consensus on what those documents are.
Everybody wants to. Aren't those an option? No, I mean, so they don't have to.
Well, not according to Massachusetts. In their document, there were two kinds of seminal documents, one that would be read and one that would be recommended. That's right.
I would recommend, when we're drawing out critical documents, listen to the primary source, because as you mentioned, we're trying to get that argumentation of where the source is. Also, to the forefront, is a preamble statement or that says these are some recommendations.
But keep in mind as we suggestions, and I think I saw that in the C3 here, they're just as an example. Right. But I think we need to be careful to have good perspectives on whatsoever like that.
Such as, but not limited to.
I always good. Language, primary seminal documents such as, but not limited to, makes it very.
Our current standards accomplish that by putting an asterisk by things that are locally assessed and leaving those things to the local control. So we could come up with a similar code or other marker that indicates that these are suggested primary sources that would be helpful to accomplish this learning goal. Putting them out there for people that don't make those connections or don't know about those things, that's good thinking, but say, because often, in fairness to test writers,
I feel strongly, still today, and will be, because it's just my position, that if an item is going to appear on the test, or we think that it's going to appear on the test, and I guess we're not going to know until after the fact, teachers have to know to make sure that they include that in their instruction. In other words, I don't want the Gettysburg Address to be a recommendation, when in reality it needs to be something that every kid reads. And do we determine that here? I don't know.
So let me ask this question. You have your different time periods and you have your key figures. So whenever we recommend to the state board, when referring to testing, maybe what we need to differentiate from is this will be on the test. These are suggestions for instruction for Missouri students to continue to learn. Does that make sense? These key figures, but then there's a lot more they need to know besides what's going to be on the test that we take for one day.
I really love that idea, but I gotta tell you, that as a teacher, that can make my job so easy, but there's the way that the curriculum is written and the test is done after from outside sources. We won't be able to do that until we see the test. We can make our best guess here, but we won't know it's on the test.
Well, the Missouri State School Board is supposed to construct the test based on our standards. So we actually have control over the test by, is that correct, Mary?
No, the state board will hire somebody to do it, and then.
Based off of what?
The standards create a blueprint
Right.
for whatever the state board chooses to do.
And this is the part you need to remember, okay, so whatever you write in the standards is basic. And in this conversation, I don't have a problem with enumerating the most basic. And then your schools can go beyond that, right? And then what you'll have is a test, and this is like what Kevin keeps reminding us of. And trust me, I believe kids should be learning, but I appreciate what he keeps grounding us in. And that is, we're gonna be held accountable to a number of stakeholders. Let's always keep in mind that if we keep these basic, then we get good tests, and we get time in the classroom for the teacher to have freedom to go beyond the basic. The thing is not to write standards that try to include everything, but the bottom line, that's what a standard is the bottom line. So when you think about your standards, think about how much time you think it's going to take to cover these in a school year, and make sure you don't take the whole school year, because you need to give discretion to your classroom teachers. Be sure that you keep just the basic information there. Then allow that margin of time to go to the classroom teachers, and then we will have our tests that only test what's basic, right? And you don't have to worry about, did I teach everything? Well, of course you did, because you taught me the basics, and then you had a flexibility. That's what's going to help you align. I agree with you.
I tried to add to our list. They seem to be also sort of like posters, things that we said we want to value in our standards. And I think Suzanne's motion is to sort of approve those, to get a collective commitment to those ideas moving forward, because we have a lot of detail. So we have perhaps a list that we can help to guide us, our memories, as we look at our standards work in the future. So of course, civic engagement, I think there's too much there, but the idea of thinking like a historian, using reading skills, co-reading skills, looking at primary sources, argumentative writing, using geography and economics to make connections, making that part of history, not separate from history, emphasizing global and local perspectives on events,
I would just like to propose that we be careful and use social science thinking, social science inquiry, just because if you're looking through the lens of geography or economics or political science, that you're looking through it, you know, you're reading like a political scientist, or you're reading like a geographer, you're reading like an economist, rather than it just being like a historian, if we're trying to make all those connections between the multiple lenses.
Yeah, so.
How does social science differ from historical?
It's inclusive of looking at it through the lens like a political scientist, not just historian, which might be a little bit differently because you're looking at it through that concept. Or even as a geographer, you're looking at the connections of human systems and physical systems to make connections.
Can you give me an example of an historian who did not do things through geographical, economic, and political science perspectives?
And the historian is looking at simply corroboration, so trying to construct historical narratives versus a geographer who's looking at more spatial reasoning and causation. So they're different skill sets. So it's not that a historian doesn't use geography, and just thinking within the subset of the discipline is slightly different. If you look at the Sapient Framework in the appendix, page 83, it kind of goes through how each field is a Sapient Framework constructed with all of these groups, the National Council for History Education, the National Council for Economic Education, geography, so on and so forth. They each articulate how different forms of economic thinking and geographical thinking and historical thinking kind of play out. And so I think that's what.
And they don't, yes. And they don't necessarily, you're making a good point, they don't necessarily act independent of one another. I think that historians do it often and should think like a geographer and think like a political scientist when trying to pull things together. And I think a geographer might do the others, but they're kind of specific to that field of social studies. And so for an educator, it's the reminder for us to link all those pieces together and not just go from one lens, but give opportunities for multiple lenses to be looked at. Because a student might actually make a better connection going from that spatial thinking piece than from, you know, the political science piece. Because all kids in the way they think are a little bit different. So that spatial type of thinking might be the way that all of a sudden you're like, whoa, now I get it. Or that they can pull it all together. So I think you make a valid point. But we need to make sure that it's all inclusive. If we're trying to make sure that we create that cohesion of continuity that can change over time, but connections to human and physical systems.
I'd like to register on there a slight mark of concern. I think that is the false particularization of fields and what is simply historical inquiry, which from the start, in fact, a lot of this, it included very much geographical thinking, medical thinking, political science, everything else.
But you can't argue and deny that these fields exist. I mean, they're disciplines. So physics is different than chemistry.
Well,
It's
that's
the same way geography is different. And so history, like political scientists ask different questions about society and historians too. Now they can cross each other, and that's what we do in schools.
What I'm saying is that, and it probably mark this down to my personal dislike is the right word, but working moment gets across the jab between social science and history as if they are somehow different or one is more inclusive than the other, and I disagree with that. But so just mark it down as on the list and go on.
I don't think these lists will standards work. And I would just suggest that we do have people in districts that teach geography, and we have government, which isn't really history, but history is part of that. I think we're also trying to recognize that sometimes historians let it a little narrow, and they're forgetting about the economic parts or the geography parts, or sometimes.
And I would say that is the feeling of particular historians rather than.
Sometimes we have historians that really focus on one, like history or an economic view of history, right, in exchange for others. And so we're recognizing that stories have biases, and they may pick and choose what social sciences are important to them. So we're just trying to capture that thinking, and we want to make sure that we're thinking geographically and politically and historically, and then there's a skills for that.
And I don't want to oversimplify this, but in our school, like many others, we don't have a history department, we have a social studies department. And within that department, we have all the disciplines within that range from a very specific Ozarkia type class to psychology, government, political science. All of those courses fall under the umbrella of social studies, not history. We don't have a history department per se. So
we must also keep the focus on what in the bill was emphasized, and that was geography, history, government, and civics. And the fact is, in weaving these other things in, we have to say they derive what happens in history and government and civics. Nothing much drives geography except forces of nature. But oh well, I guess you got lines with country borders and that sort of thing. But the point is, if you're going to put the spotlight on a certain section and say this is what's going to drive the content, then what's in the law should drive the content, and the other should support that. And that is to give it focus. I think that a lot of the critique of what's going on in social studies is we lost our focus. So that the concern is what I've been concerned about. When you pick documents, seminal documents, and you'll see that that's how I think and operate, that's part of the evidence I brought here to have my discussion, was a primary source. The problem is, are you selecting, you might say, leaders of our history because of what they've written, or do you select our leaders of history, like the founders who were the World War II veterans? This is a great outcry in English. That those people have been minimalized, even though they were the driving force. Their values, thoughts, and ideas were the driving force in creating this country. How do you minimalize those people and only go to documents? So that's a discussion we have to have. Are we going to?
Some of that's impossible to have without actually working.
Right. Say it again.
So some of those discussions are almost impossible to have generally, until we actually get the standards and involve those people in those documents. And then I think we can use those opportunities as learning moments. How do we want to construct?
Well, it just seems to me like having one component of the seminal document to use or draw out is like one point that we're not ready to actually make a decision on today. And so I might recommend that as we kind of record and make some decisions this morning, that maybe we pull that one out and readdress that when we're actually working on it. So, you know, because it doesn't feel like, and we mentioned that was one we didn't have a good thread across the room on, and I think we still have our conversation. Yeah, I think.
I could see saying seminal documents in your authors.
Right, so, you know, maybe we just wait and decide that, you know, I'm not saying get rid of the idea altogether, but perhaps at this moment, we're not quite ready to decide on that.
Something
And maybe
flag for further discussion.
Yeah, and the rest of them are much bigger ideas, they're not as dependent on the actual specific standard. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I don't know.
I second that at this point, maybe this should be, the seminal document discussion should be tabled until we dig deeper into the document, the gold standards. And then come back to it so we can have further discussion.
yeah, that's a good idea. What's exciting though is that we're actually thinking about that stuff. So
That's
it's
very good. I think all on the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All on the same page too.
And again, you'll have to forgive me because you all are used to terminology that I'm not used to. But when we're, you know, in relationship to all these things and think about how do we bridge the gap between economics and geography, history, and all of those things. I just want to keep on the table how we can somehow make the suggestion the emphasis in reading biographies of those individuals, those key individuals in history. I just think that's so important. So I just wanted, because I mean, if you look back to what you remember growing up, what got you inspired about history? What excited you? Was it some facts you learned in the class? You know, I mean, what was it? Something got your attention with history. What was it? Was it a movie? Was it music? You know, what was it? And sometimes it's biographies. And in biographies, a lot of times you learn economics, you learn geography, you learn, you know, I read a biography recently about a man from Liberia who came here. And, well, I didn't know that Liberia was named Liberia because of returning slaves from America for liberty. You know, I'd forgotten that. And I learned that from a biography. So I just want to keep that in that.
I think that goes
Overall, like how can we, because, and I realize with public education, you know, the micromanagement of it, and the specifics and measurement, we're constantly having to measure, and the pressure of standardized testing and constantly must measure that stuff. It tends to weigh that down, I think, a little bit. So I don't know if there's a way to kind of.
That goes to our discussion about documents.
Okay.
Our standards really say what students should know, and then the documents are illustrative of here's some places where you might get to those things. And we can't really thread in, you should be this. But we will perhaps, I think about that index where we have suggested resources of things that would help students to be able to learn those things in the class. But we wouldn't be able to actually run a standard that requires that.
Well, and then my next question would be, you know, in the overreaching of this, we're discussing timelines, we're discussing when do you put this subject area into this grade level. Should we not somehow begin foundationally with what should 7th graders know? Should they be studying over 3,000 to 4,000 years BC? And then should 8th graders be studying, continue studying world history should freshmen moving into government?
That's also a local control.
That's a local control issue. Okay.
So when we look at this document here, we have 6, 7, 8, which is middle school, and then we have the high school. In high school, we're going all over the place.
Okay.
They're local,
Right.
they're other government, So.
Well, I know, like in the state of Missouri, in 5th grade, you have to have Missouri history in 5th grade. And then in 7th grade, right?
And actually, we actually had that discussion.
Was it 4th grade? Okay.
Yeah.
In my.
So the elementary schools, yes, we're sort of saying this grading order that's.
Well, I know in the Ohio documents, they specify history in 7th grade for world history. It's specified in their state standards, so we're moving away from that a little bit.
That's suggest, we have, there is a statute about teaching the Constitution and history in high school.
But that's secondary. There is an elementary component to that.
But
Is there a motion to sort of wrap up our discussion on these?
so should we remove 6?
Yes.
Can we remove table 6 for now?
Is it okay if I don't need it? Just
Right.
Strike
Yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Table for dinner.
I don't think we're saying we're not going to talk about some of the documents, just how we actually include them.
I just think we're tabling the issue for now until a later discussion. Right. You should have actions on it.
So I would approve the consensus.
A second.
On paper, of approving our list of it's gonna call these big ideas for history. Let's say aye.
Aye.
Really, the next item on our agenda was to look at our current standards. Oh, I'm sorry, Mary wanted to talk just briefly about testing, just to remind us not to get too concerned about that testing. Go ahead.
I don't know if I have enough.
Sure.
national academies to the U.S. Secretary of Ed about the limitations of testing. And this is a part of our history that I think is pertinent to the conversation of where we find ourselves in education, how to learn from the errors of the past, and how to move forward as we advocate for our standards. In this letter, what happened was before the Race to the Top application was actually released, the National Academy's Board on Testing and Assessment had convened a meeting, and representatives of the U.S. Department of Ed were at the meeting, where BOTA, which is the Board of Testing and Assessment, was going to discuss the limitations of an assessment plan. Arne Duncan released the Race to the Top application before that meeting. And so the only recourse BOTA had was to go through the public review process of their letter, which ate up some time. In other words, the timing of when that Race to the Top application was released and when this letter was released had a very long time frame. The Race to the Top application was published in July. This could come out until October, but it was in 2009. When this letter came out, it comments on the proposed assessment plan, and I'd like to call your attention to page 3 right now. A test score is an estimate rather than an exact measure of what a person knows and does. And the whole point of this is, the more you try to expect out of a test, in other words, the more complex you get in your expectations of what a test will do, the less it can actually tell you. All right, and this is the problem. This is why SBAC is failing, why PARC is failing, why states are pulling out. And I'll use Kentucky as an example. The PARC test was administered in Kentucky, and because it could not actually tell what the students had learned because the items were so convoluted, Kentucky withdrew from participation in the consortium and devised its own test to make clearer test items. You understand? The PARC was trying to get not just English and math, but attitudes, values, and mindset in its test items. When you do that, it's like mixing colors. You get a color purple, which has different degrees of red and blue. But how much of that is blue and how much of it is red? You can't tell, and you can't disaggregate it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I appreciate the fact that we think we can move education forward through tests by expecting new generation tests. But what these psychometricians are saying, we tried that in the 90s. It couldn't be done. Because the formulas we had now for statistics won't show us how you get the different elements you're trying to test within one item. Does that make sense? All right, so on the bottom of page 6, well, actually, go to page 5, because if you need to say anything to your superintendents, to your school boards, to your legislators, this is what we've been saying for years. And finally, you've got the backing of the national organization in statistics and measurement talking to the U.S. Department of Ed. If you look at theory of action, the theory of action is connecting the dots, explaining the common sense terms which program features are expected to produce, which result in order to reach the final desired outcome. Okay, so in other words, what's your purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? Go to the last statement in that paragraph. If the test results lead educators to shift their attention from teaching to test preparation, and that would not confirm the result expected by the theory of action. In other words, you say you're educating students, but through the test you're actually driving them to test preparation, then that theory of action suggests the possibility of unintended consequences. In other words, you're not
the highest authority in statistics.
So your recommendation to us is,
Your recommendation to me is, when you think of these tests, I know you're an administrator. The point is, teachers we're so enthusiastic about education and what we think we can make, empower our students to do. He's reminding us there's a reality here, and that is, we cannot force through our standards development the development of a statistic design that isn't ready to be developed yet. And because of that, you can't expect, when I say go back to your basics and standards, because you're going to be you will be accountable to them. You have to keep in your head the framework for the limitations of the test. And those limitations aren't creativity, they're statistics. Okay? That's why Massachusetts works the way it does. Because the people who designed that, not just for clarity, but for simplicity, understood their tests were going to show whether or not the very basic, simple information was gathered. That doesn't, and again, if you keep your parameters for the time needed to cover these standards, then you've released your teachers to creativity. So don't put into your standards everything you want to know. Put into the standards what's most basic and what's most simple to get your measurement.
See, and Mary, that's where I think I disagree. I understand the reality, so trust me, I'm not being not pragmatic about the reality of this. But I also think that there's an opportunity here to break from the bonds of the test as measurement, and it's a risk we take. Because one thing we can think about is, okay, we can create this really high level kind of, I don't want to say unmeasurable, but unmeasurable by the ways in which we're currently measuring learning in our schools. We can create that set of standards and get rejected, and the testing companies say we can't do that, and the state board says, okay, you can't do that, so we're going to get moved to something different. So that's a risk we can take. To me, it's a risk worth taking, because my hope is that if we create a set of standards that is asking the construct to be measured in a different way, that it actually asks testing companies, because they want money, to create a different kind of assessment that's going to match our standards.
That's where we are.
That's
What just kind of generally briefly, how do you see that?
Well, I mean, so
What does that look like?
So if you think about even the way that we test, I mean, the AP tests and the traditional tests we have in our classrooms are two distinct forms of tests in terms of what they're trying to measure, what they're trying to accomplish. And so if I'm asking students to corroborate documents and say historically, and I'm trying to extract that skill, then I'm pushing the test beyond tell me when, when the battle will come. It's like we're moving it past these kinds of really simple. So we've got to do some of that. I think that's reality. But I think there's also some of this, what can we do to push the standards in a direction where we actually are driving the test as opposed to letting the testing companies, in a sense, drive us.
So why not leave that to the classroom teacher? Here's where you hit the wall, and that is in the limitations of what the statistics will actually be able to do. And here's your negative outcome, because we're already feeling it. One, people assume that you can use these results to inform instruction.
Right.
Okay, so that's the other thing is, and this is where we are right now, we're reflecting our against Amendment 3. We're trying to make us responsible for information not tested. Okay? And so their grades will be misused.
I think I have a perspective that help maybe bridge the gap between the two of you. Standards are often written so precisely in detail so that they're easily measured with multiple choice tests. What we want is standards, what we want are expectations for students that don't necessarily fit the multiple choice means that they need to think harder about what kind of assessments that they do give us, and in the limited way that we're assessed already, then that's their problem. But we want to, but let's not, I think what Alex is suggesting is let's not write our standards just so they're easily tested with a local choice test. Does that make sense?
And I think we're talking about the same thing, right? So I think, like, there is, I think we're saying the same thing, I mean, we're just.
I'm not against any of the project-based learning you want, I'm just saying it's gotta be done at a lower level. And the issue has to do with what you can actually get out of a standardized test. You have to keep that in mind. And that we're already trying these new generation tests, but they're being abandoned by states because you can't, once you enter the human evaluator, okay, and that's what these essay tests are. Once you enter the human evaluator into there, you've introduced a level of bias that doesn't exist in the other tests. And you've increased the cost exponentially compared to computer testing. What SBAC and Park thought they were going to get was an ability for a computer software to read essay tests. And it doesn't exist.
Okay, I would like to just bring information here. I think that we all probably have the same opinion about test making and even test evaluation after the fact. And I'd like to recommend that we table this again because right now, we wouldn't even know who the person would be that would be developing this test for, what entity would, or anything like that. And while the human component is the area of controversy, I think, or of ambiguity around, for everyone around this table, it exists in the classroom. You have that human element in the classroom when grading is going on. AP is done that way. It's done at the college level. We will never get rid of that, and we're not going to be able to fix that. And I think that we may get bogged down in this conversation right now when we have a really good chance to move with our standards. Please don't think that I'm trying to push it off, but I think it's one of those things that we need to wait again until we get to the point we can have the discussion. I hear what you're saying about create the basic, and I'm interpreting when you say that to be, we're creating the floor, and we can always, the classroom teacher can always go above the floor, but we have to stand on that floor, and kids have to be able to stand on that floor to show what they're knowing and able to do at that grade level. If that's what you mean by basic, I think I'm totally in agreement with you, and I love that you keep saying that. But we're creating the floor. But and then anywhere beyond that, the teacher has, or the building, or the district, however that works out at the local level, has the ability to expand beyond. And so if that's where we are, I think we need to keep moving so we can, get that done. And the implications of testing, and we have a chance for more voice and discussion too, but we're never going to get rid of that human component, ever. We will never get rid of it.
No, it's not about getting rid of it, it's about understanding what it introduces and minimizing the sources of bias.
I understand, and I think every educator would agree with you.
I'm
But
just
again,
saying, we've got to put the bit in our house, and I explain this to people who have this high creative ability in their personalities and characters. There's always set of limitations that have to come up with these. And what we have, we're going to respect how these tests are going to be used. It's going to be used not just for you, but against you. You have to understand their limitations and work within those limitations. And then leave the rest to the classroom teacher in the district in terms of the creativity.
And I don't think you're good at argument. Anybody,
Can I put this in layman's terms, just for my own understanding? What's my brother-in-law? Jeremy. Jeremy! He worked for the Attorney General. Jeremy! Sorry.
Focus.
I know. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, we're kind of like the middleman between tests and teachers, correct? We're kind of the middleman in layman's terms, where we have to make, and I think what Jamie said, we all agree, clear, concise communication, communicable standards, so that teachers understand it and tests understand it. I don't see how, we're trying to divorce the two, but then we can't. So to say we had to table this over that, I'm kind of confused on how to do that, to be quite frank, because it's all kind of together. And so you know, you guys can figure out how you do that, because again, that's from what I'm hearing, like kind of the middleman. Does that make sense?
I think what I'm saying,
What
is
I'm
the discussion about park and smart balance and those pieces, that's out of our control really as to who they end up hiring to do it. And Mary, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm hearing everything that you're saying. And I think that there's concerns about that through educators, parents, patrons, everything. But again, we have to determine what kids need to know and be able to do, and then weave that in. But I think at this point, we haven't even gotten to a point where we can have that conversation. So when I asked to table it, I'm just saying, can we table it long enough to get into this and look at this, and then we can see those implications and have those conversations at that point?
This is a bridge between our discussion here today and the fact that we need to keep this in the back of our heads, that we have boundaries around us. That's what this is about.
Sam, I'm going to go back up Mary's comment.
I just want to point out here too that, we self-edit to the point where we've made our standards too low. You said yesterday, the standards, first year teacher, it should be guidance. And if we have that fear of the test, I think I've always found that whenever you are true to what you're supposed to be doing and the task you've been given, it works out in the end. And I think if we create the best curriculum, the best standards that we can to meet the needs of our students and those points that we talked about, the testing will be secondary. And other people can deal with that, but I think what we need to, I always wear this prayer box whenever I come to these meetings with important people. It was given to me by former students, and I put a little prayer in that for me and all my future students. And this reminds me that the reason we're in this room is not that group, testers, administrators, whatever. It's about our kids. So if we write this document, we edit this document with the best interest of the students and what they need to learn to be engaged, caring, effective adults, I think we've done our job well.
I just want to say that real quick, and I agree with you on the scale, but it does say a lot that they have the right to change things if they don't think that it's, what they can use. And so it is good to have an understanding of what will happen with this as it proceeds forward. If we understand all aspects better, then we present something that they aren't as likely to tweak. You know what I mean? So there is that aspect.
My last comment for me is, I agree with you. I think we have to move on, and we get bogged down in this stuff sometimes. However, we also have to have the wisdom to understand that every standard we promote or recommend, it will be assessed. And we cannot separate standards from curriculum, instruction, and assessment. We all, as teachers, know that all of those things fit together. So what's important for us is not necessarily to talk about these things all the time, but to at least have them in the back of our mind. Is this something that all kids must know and be able to do? This will be assessed on some level. We don't know where or when or how or what, but my daughter's going to have to be assessed on this standard. Is that appropriate? Is it an appropriate standard? Is it something that we want her to know and be able to do above everything else that she learns in that class? It's indispensable. So there you go.
May just one last comment. What Alex is saying interests me. Something along the lines of an essay question that gets meaning and understanding from the student, that is evaluated by, my preference, the teacher or someone, I suppose, above that. That would be really, I would like that a whole lot. But a caution, speaking from a programmer, if you're having a computer evaluate this, what you are getting is literally meaningless. There may be some correlation between things, but there's no meaning in what it goes through and picks out and calculates. So, essay, great. Having the teacher evaluate it, fantastic. Having a program Howie, that, bad idea.
We, our district has worked really hard on historical thinking, and how do we get teachers to do good work, thinking through primary sources and understanding that text, understanding the source, other sources, how they fit together and corroborate each other. And there are people that are thinking about objective ways to measure some of that thinking without writing. And so I won't get into them now, but there are some really creative and I think valuable assessment methods that are emerging that can still be multiple choice questions, but they're not multiple choice questions based on a fact, but they're about an understanding or recognizing something in a document, recognizing what evidence best supports an idea in a document. So there are things that are out there that are like pretty exciting, I think, that will get to some of these issues. So we might just keep that in mind that this doesn't always have to be writing to accomplish that, because those are maybe things that are hard outcomes for standardized tests. And, you know, it's interesting that the elementary group yesterday, one of the things they did is they broke into 2 groups, and they got big pieces of poster paper, and they came up with criteria for evaluating standards as they went forward to discuss them. Meaning, what are the things we're going to decide are the make a good standard, and then we would use that as the criteria as we looked at each standard.
It's a great idea.
And sort of in a backdoor way, that's what we've sort of done over our last day, as even our discussion this morning is what are the things we should value in our standards? What should they accomplish? I think we also have sort of, in a philosophical way, talked about the idea of specificity. We want a clear standard that does not dictate a specific item in it. So we've sort of gotten that, but I think that might come up as we look at standards further. And we discussed the idea that they should be things that are actionable and interpretable by teachers as they try to implement standards. And so even our discussion about assessment has helped them to frame our thinking about what kind of standards are reasonable to expect in the standard document and whether or not. Now, we don't have a list of criteria there, but I think all of those have helped to frame our thinking about what standards should look like. And so I'd like to move that we move forward and look at the current Missouri standards with an eye towards the standards from other states, things we liked and didn't like about those. So what has Missouri got now? And I think we're in a whole lot better place to do that now than we were yesterday or even a month ago.
And you know, something in light of that, I was actually just thinking the same thing you said, I think, is to show our newer audience. I don't know if we can do this up here, but I don't think Mary was in the room with Jessica, and we all kind of formulated the standard from the old standard and just kind of how we saw that. And I wonder if we could just start with that, just to kind of give an idea to them kind of how we looked at it and said, what's language that would be clear. And I think that goes along with what Suzanne said, that when we keep the kids in focus, it will come out more excellent, and then we won't have to worry so much maybe about the standardized test, because it's going to fall into place with, but I think that's a good starting point.
So are you seconding the motion to look at those raised hands? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you. If it's permissible, I'd like to just talk a bit about what I did, and then I'll mention.
Could you see which document are you going from?
To the same email now to the group.
But there's like four, so.
It's from new format.
It's new format.
Yeah.
New format, okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to talk through this document so everybody knows what we're looking at. And then I'd like everyone to spend some time with it. Because we all know, just as I would do this as a teacher, I would say, here's this document, here's what you should think about it, and let's move on. We really need time to look at it. Just like we looked at Ohio and California, and what I'd like to come out of this is some really clear consensus items about what needs to be done. What should be done with Missouri, either in format or in the actual way that we're communicating. So, last time we met, we looked at strand 1, which is currently called Principles of the Public. And so I didn't change any wording, just left that there. And we worked on letter A, which is the first item in that, which talks about civic responsibility in a republic. And basically what we did, in the old document, everything is organized vertically. So we have 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, well, the world history of Americans are and so it is, in that format, it's very easy to look across and to see how a skill or concept gets more rigorous over time. So in this format, it's not quite as nice to do that. So I'm just going to look at that. So Principles for Public A, identify responsibilities that governments and citizens need to accept and to participate in a republic.
Can you make that a little bigger, Brian? At the bottom.
And then I'll go back and get smaller. So you'll notice that 6th grade is this page, and sort of finishes up on the 2nd page in this new format. Now, when they printed it out, we didn't quite get the whole thing because I saved this file as a Word 2013 document, and it didn't have Word 2013, and so it didn't format on our pieces of paper. Okay, our hard copies, we don't get every single standard because they had trouble getting it formatted.
Can you say again what you said about it's not as easy to follow? What you're talking about? You said across you can see how it's, and you said it's not as easy to follow.
I sure can. Yeah. It was asked that I explain the difference in vertical. I did it 5th and 6th grade. This is our current document. This is the K through 8 document. Not decided yet, but a lot of outcome of this. We have a K5 group and 6-12 group, and right now 6, 7, 8 is on the same document as K5, and I'm guessing that those are going to need to be separated. And so when we look at strand, we have a skill or concept in grade 6, and then we have it in grade 7, and then we have it in grade 8. And we discussed how that one skill or concept should be the same idea. It should just become a little bit deeper over time as our students learn and grow in that concept. And so this format helps that analysis out because we see it all connected that way. We see how 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade are all right next to each other with the same skill or concept, and that it's easy to follow that across and to do that work of aligning that upwards. What it doesn't do, though, is when I look at this document as a classroom teacher or as someone trying to develop a curriculum around this document, if I'm trying to understand 6th grade, I have to look at the 6th grade column over 36 pages. So I look at 6th grade here, and then follow that column down. There's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing. And then eventually I might find something there, just an hour in history, and there's stuff there. And I've got to go through 36 pages to figure out what's going on in 6th grade. And so my idea was to realign the document so that everything for 6th grade is all together. And so what you gotta see is, I try to give a header for each grade. And on the left is the grade level. So this is 6th grade. And I gave it a title based on the content that we are currently asking that grade level to do. So we have Principles of Republic, Principles of Government Systems, these are the 7 strands of the Blue Place map. Continuity and change, this is our history. Economic concepts, fire alarm. Geographic study, people groups and cultures, social science inquiry. I'll make a couple comments about these last 3 strands. Generally, in 6, 7, and 8, geographical study is geographical study, and it doesn't really change. People groups and cultures is generally people groups and cultures, and over those 3 grades, that doesn't change. The same is true as social science.
Do you just mean like in 6th grade, the language we're reading here is
It's just maybe copy and paste it.
so we're not seeing a progression.
Not seeing a progression.
Okay.
And it is exactly true that social science inquiry, these things here on the end, for 6, 7, and 8, they're copy and paste. Just like it's true that those social science inquiry standards are slightly different once we get to high school. And we start with world history, that would be our first course level expectation for high school. When we look at social science inquiry, the survey never changes that. Over the course of high school, it is what it is. And I think there's much better language in some of the documents that we looked at yesterday for social science inquiry than what we're currently looking at. So, an example of our looking at the survey might be, we feel as a group that we can work and improve the social science inquiry strand. And so that could be an action step that we take based on our understanding about what standards you do, knowing what other people have done, and saying social science inquiry could be an action step. We can make that better. And so that would be an example of an outcome based on our examination of the survey document individually or in small groups.
When I look at the curriculum alignment initiative and the way that they just written it out, essentially, I mean, this is higher ed, correct? So it doesn't include 6, 7, 8. It's just
what you should be at the history of
but they sort of distributed the information the same way Massachusetts did. Simple, just sentences, had Roman numerals, yeah. This is what you do here instead of graphing. I don't know how you all feel. I mean, what you prefer the graph? I'm asking.
So here's what we do is I like you to make notes about your overall impressions of our current standards, and then we'll do what we did yesterday, is just give everyone a chance to sort of share their thinking about where Missouri is at, where our standards are at, and then we can sort of come up with some items of consensus that we all feel like, yes, this format works, this format doesn't work. I like that format. Is that okay?
Right. Do we include, are we looking at CAI is Missouri standards as well? Do we want to include looking at that? And there's not much there to look at. Just this right now.
Does everybody have a hard copy? The best way to look at it is the electronic format. So if you want to, if you can buy it with somebody that has the way to
Somebody really watching, I spoke with you, I don't have this, so someone hard copy that you can find.
Do we have one more of those?
Yeah, you can have mine.
for the same.
Yeah, I just find it easier to look at it electronically versus.
So I encourage either individual work if you feel that way, or just talk with your neighbors as you have ideas, record them down on sticky notes so that we can hold on to your good thinking for our discussion.
And one comment from before, if we could have it as our educational curriculum document, headings that are grammatically correct, that would be awesome. If someone who is so poor with grammar sees this and just flips, I can imagine what the grammar teacher, principles of republic. A republic, republics, republican government.
Right now.
Please.
Yes.
What is these hours?
Yeah, it's mine.
It's kind of funky, yeah, you may want to send it just in a group. But I think you gotta do that.
It did for me, and when I don't download it, just
I
go
go
down,
down,
view
I
it,
just viewed it.
yeah, view it.
Yes.
If you just view it, it's
That
not.
view works.
Yeah, but a PDF would be great if you don't.
That makes me feel better.
Oh, yeah. Or does it handle it? Let's say this.
Question, Brian, are we looking just under the first column each month?
No, we're looking at, we're making our thoughts about the document in general. For instance, this is our history, right?
Right.
I feel like,
That's what I usually get smart.
like formatting, what is that? It's columns and.
Do we like how the columns are arranged, do we like, you know, is it?
Okay. Well, I don't think it has to be just formatting. I mean, I think, these are clear. I like the clarity of these. I'm concerned about the lack of clarity of these. I think that those are also worthy. So I feel like personally, we could do a whole lot with that. I think we could fix up the social science inquiry and have it done today. And fix spring summer. I think that is an observation. That's not formatting, it's an observation.
Yeah, so just for clarity, we're looking at format and making comment about content throughout all the columns.
Yeah.
We want to just focus on inquiry at this point,
All the columns.
all of the columns.
Not drilling down to a specific standard, right?
Okay.
General observations about
General
the
observations.
kind of content in the column.
Column would be that the way we put that lesson in one column class, I think worked well. When we, maybe this would be the question, when we actually get into this, we may take one column at a time, or even now.
If we continue doing what we did last time, we'll probably need to go back to the old format so we can see it across and we can read if we like this way.
So, we took the second one, the government systems, and it's within the first, and worked on that, and does that in the next section. And that would work, and put time with all of these, that's complete. That's scattershot, especially if there's one change here, so that's what we're updating the notes.
Right now, those columns are not necessarily related. Right, this is sixth grade, and that's an observation.
Okay,
It's
so
not
so
sure
that,
how we do it.
yeah.
I was saying that just because A and B or G or J are at the top doesn't mean that they have anything to do with each other.
Okay.
They have nothing to do with each other. That's just what happens when we take all these columns, put them side by side. This is what we're asking sixth grade teachers to do. Now, how do we?
Now it's what you're saying. Okay.
How does this work for a teacher? Is there something that we can do with this to help them? Because this is really what we're doing is we're giving them a bunch of ideas that aren't really related and saying go. And really suggesting any way to put them together.
Like, I'm
So
sure
it's
that's what they're gonna work, but I was not smart enough to figure it out.
I mean, when I was doing this, it took me hours, and I kept thinking, oh my goodness. Like, I like that it's all
I was like, is this a good idea? But it really did show me that we're having a lot of different ideas here that really don't, we're not. We said that we want things to be connected. And that's what, that's part of it.
Yeah.
So this is the big release. I don't really have any answer to this.
Yeah.
Well, I was telling Amanda that this is, we have government history, economics, geography, cultures, and inquiry, and there's no connection between anything here. Right?
Sometimes old people are still really. Visually enable us to say,
So,
to see the connection.
yes.
And if they're not able to
I know. And so I say, here's the way that we can look to make connections. Now, can we make connections?
See, if we can, this becomes history.
So how do we help make connections here? Because we have all these things that live with it. So I'm glad there are minds in this room that are smarter than me.
That's why I like
There's no way to make those connections if you don't.
you don't visually see how side by side.
Just how, at the moment, all these things are just taking us into another plot. They don't necessarily, exist. This is the one that we did. All the just there. But it's how do we work to make sense with each other? All those questions and moments, how do we make it all necessary?
Because it's not clear, we create a distinction. So we're not very strong. So that's me making a distinction here, making a distinction here. And all, it's all this is what happened in this time. This is what happened in this time. This is what happened and this is how they have that. And the people who are talking about this is so you look at the next period, and in this period you have, and then this was like, this period you have, these people, this is how they do, this is what they want, this is what they, how they sold goods.
They really like one.
And to me, time periods are going to differentiate in all of these periods.
Yes, there are, at this point, there are no.
And so when I look at this stuff and I go, give me some years. Give me classical period, give me some years. Or as a teacher, and then I can go back and I can reference those years, that period. And then I can make tests off of those years in that period.
Yeah.
No, I don't, no, it's not. So I'm a year that I think you're going to get used to that idea. But we're not there, so we're kind of progressing on drive by stuff. So I mean, I don't know if it's okay, it's something to just look at.
understand it's Christmas. It feels like
You don't even know if they're
I'm supposed to do all those things.
but remember, that's, so when I look at all this stuff, I'm going, why don't we not do grade level experiences and do a timeline and experience? And then the schools, and they're saying the schools are turning on. I'm doing one, I'm saying that many of the standards, I know they're not choosing standards. Standards are choosing the grade level. Other than 6, 7, 8, you see the middle school, so I don't know if that's in my mind. That makes it up. Time period. You're right today. What's that? So, I mean, to me, it's hard to me and confusion around these ceremonies strong history, clear, it's absurd, and I don't want to be absurd. I don't think anything like that. I don't I don't know how to. Because to me, I mean, why don't you determine a timeline as you're responsible?
Yeah.
Why don't we determine a timeline? And the schools can determine the grade level when they want to introduce that timeline. I personally agree with it.
Well, because it's not,
It's 60 minutes. Drugs.
there's, you have to be careful. And she's culture is I get what you're saying. For expansion, you know, or whatever, you know,
You know, and the kids are not retaining it, they're not retaining it, and they don't remember it. How are we gonna get it more?
I think what I think is. And then because those two are going to be
This is what I would do. I would do any of that. I would do periods. Time period, 5 years. And then down there, I would do this time. It's very long, it's very basic, it's logical. And to me, that's how you organize. If you're looking at science and so we're looking at it in the and if they want to interconnect, how they can interconnect at that time. So, I mean, they do all this stuff. Okay. But.
I think it's another peak where it's 6, 7.
You got it.
This would affect
Yes.
What you're seeing is sort of topics in there.
How's the 7th grade Sixth grade. That's when we start.
I always start going.
So this is my class, watching your time period, but it's clear. And then next year. Why are we not doing it based on time periods? And then you can see your, then that allows
But
us
I'm gonna say it's really hard from 12 associations.
I've done it, for our district, it's really hard.
So then you move from, so they start to everything, but then you have to go
I'm 6th, 7th grade. One skill, 6.
well, I think it's actually you make it
It's a lot more sense. Consider you have it during your concept, they can know. Okay, and we're going to, so we're going to be studying it because, it's alongside of that's freshman and high school, we choose to do American history.
Yeah, this is how they
Economics and no, I but I think that
So, and we're just looking at format here, not what
That's what we were saying, this would be your. If you had a document for the teacher, this is different, this is essential to this.
Right.
I just wish there was some way, some connection between all that stuff. Just because it's side by side doesn't mean that it's necessarily important. It's still around. At least it's just different, it's all right here. Concerned with the specific content.
Somebody that all to do that this time. So that's next year. Now, if we have our new economic,
all I'm suggesting.
That is why
That would almost look like a replacement, just in the studies only way.
Yeah, but
For a very long time.
summary of expectations. That's just great.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking over there about this timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. This is specific to geography, what they've done. Goal, mission, for that. Great.
So the theme of the US.
This is more of a, here's how this is the, you start with, you're gonna stand aside this. To get people understanding what's going on, you're saying, at this stage, the first day you do this, the second day you do this, and the third day you do this. And we're gonna tell you, and if that's all you need to know, then you can stop. But if you want to know what people are teaching, then you have to go back to this.
What's the best way I need to know about it? Is it how the distribution?
Right.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Oh.
You're going to either say this is great.
Right. Yeah. That, because this page, that paragraph.
This is an experiment.
So you would like to see the progression of the gas. In other words, you would like to see signs. In other words,
Yes.
We have a consultation.
we should go behind the side to synthesize words at the end. You know?
Yeah.
To me, I
I think what they're saying is the sixth grade history, you can do sixth grade and seventh grade, you have 2 years for college. I think that's what they're implying with that, it's like, so over those 2 years, you can do all this.
And you're studying all the races in that time period. That's going to help that student remember that time period better than just kind of discombobulated. And then, so in high school, you have all the electives. You know, as a high school, you can determine that, so freshman will take high school take these courses this year, that determines that. And that will, and you'll go over that time period. Granted, you can have a backdrop in the beginning of the previous 2 years of study. So that you have the contract that's having the student, you will have a contract with how you're entering into the new time period, so that's your review.
I don't know that right now, it's giving me a headache, but I tend to really. It's just me, Jamie, and it may not, so.
Students, I really don't know how to work that in, but American history and all that, but
I think we're gonna just start to say what this is. So people have to, I just think that this down so I can put it.
But then when you're saying,
I know more about time periods, writing,
What the price, right, and so
things,
we make
and
decisions
different
regarding
levels
what
of stuff. I think the time period, and maybe
So
they're not
just-
sitting here and
So
what happens,
right.
they're not. Don't, I have, I'm changing the culture to affect the next time period. So to not use that as a foundation to me is, you know, by giving it 3 years, so we give them years. Actually, not years, that's set up.
So you're seeing this as how we categorize curriculum.
Or as we categorize on daily curriculum, yes, it also helps the teachers to know, I'm looking at this from this time period, about these time periods. And it may not have textbooks and it's considered the textbooks are talking about this and random and right about it doesn't teach them anything they don't remember and they're more than this. Right. And so that's kind of my well, when I think it's a history, so it defines. It may be that we need to do combination, fix a lot of things, so now I'm just thinking about this. I don't remember specific years of the period, classic period, Israel period, I can't remember all of that, but I know it's yes. Okay, so that's.
It was out of those kids in grade eight, which is.
And that's actually the job, but we're going to try to refreshing, and that's refreshing ideas, this is our kind of break policy, meetings without space. And I'm still doing. So I think 10 pounds, it's all that counts. We don't work around each other. All they have, that's all they. She makes good decisions, I do not.
Yeah, right.
But the lifestyle, I was there, I was thinking, I can be, just, they have a lot of budget there. Figure out what's.
What do you guys think?
So that's where I was like,
What do we think?
Yeah, well, you know, he was a nice. Where do you write all this? What's the most effective way to present that? 4 minute, or we were looking at next choices, which elaborates on versus bullets. Yeah, and you put that on there, can you put that? Not yet, but but the truth is completely, actually, I put these both. One, that visual the maybe. Makes sense to have an idea. Yeah, yeah. It's just to make a basic sentence that we're not quite sure what it means, and then you can still bullet those things that are needed. Yeah, that's everything. And the other thing that we were looking at, is you write about the cut and paste piece on the tools of inquiry. There need to be some direction. Yeah, okay. Locate in the beginning, identify somebody that start synthesizing and interpreting and analyzing. But it's the staff, right?
grade 6, grade 12.
Tonight. 2
It's
layers.
just 2 hours. Not even that.
Maybe by our 40.
It doesn't make sense to have 6, 7, 8 doing something, and then we don't do those anymore, but now we're asking them to do these things. It may not be harder.
So it's like,
But I don't like how that's wrapped.
Just as
And I can see, I see more like that.
And yeah, high school, not necessarily government at the end. So they can't really become the hardest. Yeah. Same skills.
Well, that's where I'm like,
This is a technology.
And what can, yeah, what kind of technology, what kind of research, what kind of presentations?
Do you think we'll be done with our thinking by 10:30 or getting more time?
yeah, so we can at least like.
It's a nice idea.
Yeah, to get an idea where we're going.
So, how about we say between 10:30, 10:40, take a break, at 10:40, we'll have our thoughts and share them out. And if we feel like we need a little bit more time on certain items, we spend more time on certain items.
Are we clearly investing in the fair?
That's what we're doing. What we can do is,
You know, like.
really about that, we're done. Use that before or two.
Right, like appropriate tools reflecting, like, you know, the modern, availability, you know, something like that, but I do think you run the risk, you know,
Don't
because,
have your
you know, we're into, you know, maybe into a teacher and says, hey, you know, you're super duper.
See, the one above was distinguished between fact and genius. If you want to use class and see, I know what I'm supposed to do. But right now, I'm going to go back to my secret.
And that's it, and sometimes that identification process can be traumatized. Sometimes it will be human to, you know, like to have to be able to, you know, these humans are so like, you or, I need to report items or I need to look at newspaper or, you know, I think there's times actually hard enough evaluating my presentation. It's not just evaluating the time, but knowing what's missing. So what is.
And we're going to, yeah, what I do is for our research, how we can actually assist them. Third week, I'm in the assignment, we'll find my website. And so can you keep us organized? Print journal,
Which is major, I mean, it's, I know, I grew up that you just, any time that you, 3 or 4 country videos, you have to think about what allows you to do. Did you wear the right clothes?
What if it's a website? If we did,
Right.
is this a federal website or is this a referee thing or is that a Jason?
we should remember to make sure that's included in our goals, which is space. And that might take care of that kind of focus statement of use technology. It's not the technology itself, it's the environment, it's
Well, in fact, it's very complicated. So that can actually do I'm having a lot of
so why do you mean, like, let's just do it. Yeah, that was somebody.
Yeah, see?
I got the same version, but I don't know.
Well, if you do something like that for work, what you can do. So we're going to see.
I brought you here.
An overview, which is just a PC guide, essentially. And it just has a set of options.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a surprise. Nice. All right.
This is our ideal statement.
Oh, and
And each ideal statement is so negotiated with the group. And it's not necessarily trying to a single standard, but just those things that we feel like are so more complicated. And I've created a place for people to interact on what they've done related to each concept. So it's not really used as that as but this is a place where people come in and say, as I address this system question, this is what I did, this is what I did, here's what I did in my class. And if people collaborating that way, they don't have to be face-to-face. Sometimes it's a little easier, so that each unit has that. We also have picked a reading and writing strand to build on. They build over time, so they sort of start with the more simple ones, but what reading and writing can we ask you to practice? So a little bit of that focus on trying to do all of these things. So we get a little really fun, trying to make these statements very specific. Also, not just the thing that you know, but also what they do as they accomplish this. So the process of accomplish together, some of them are better than others, and that is our way. That's I will learn this on this by sharing this. That's what we're trying to change those second statements. I can evaluate a success of the progressive movement by or two. Now, we have a website where I've taken these things and I put in documents and other articles and other things so that they can click straight to a text that they can use to help us to those topics.
I said I had to take it and get it.
So this is available for you, okay?
This you can
I didn't
use,
say when I just
but
put
our website is
it on. And then here, yeah, take this.
But this, I mean, it's cool.
Yeah,
When it first finished,
yeah, we did, right.
you might want to close my
So,
ears.
let's rewind so that there's,
I would just say easy about this because
sure. We're gonna share it.
and Mary was down in New York State.
For the audience.
When I was thinking of history, when I picked the graph, I was going to do, this is what I want to do.
I think everybody's sort of like now thinking visually, which is good.
Yes, I think that this is where we want to.
I wonder if we're going to come up with fun solutions.
Okay. And this is, so in the school, kind of determines what time and what we're looking at, but definitely what to correct.
For 6, 7, and 8, we're telecom.
Okay.
Everybody's got to take history.
Sure.
In high school, there's
Well, okay, so we're still not
second,
really, this is
then
where
it's
we're at. But we do things based off of years.
I think so, I was thinking
Classical, so I say classical, which is what, 1750 to 1850. Just classical era. So we're dealing with eras, okay? Now I'm printing my journal before that, just using this. So then you're looking at, in that time period, you're looking at geography, economics,
Tell me what you would remember key strategies.
then you're looking
I
at,
don't remember.
yeah,
Now I took, this was the initial, so we have to take it through this stuff.
and history in that time period, so in history. So this way, the time period dictates. And then if they want to put grade 7 here, grade 8 here, some high schools want to do 9, 10, or 9, and 9th grade they have to do dark economics, government, they have 10th grade, and they have to have this, that is done in that time period. And that way it connects, and then they learn that here, all those subject matters, and they learn history that time period. And it just goes, to me, that's how I learned it. And that is how I learned it. And I learned history that way now. Who was it? And class history and why, and what was going on.
Yeah, or I don't know, this is.
I read that, I know that
Time period
sometimes,
dictates
but I feel like this means something.
what areas disciplining.
This means something.
So we may not,
So key strategies.
I'm not sure what you're thinking about this, but right now with the grade level
so
difference
that's.
So here it is.
not only depth of thinking, but also historical figures. Kids do get remember the Greeks again. So right now, we're doing different periods of history in different grade levels. Never just repeating the same.
This is the actual, that's what I know, but it's going to this time. So like,
That's what I was doing. They're also printed and some
And you're
So
also
we'll say
yes. Okay, so this is what I need to know. This is time, place, background information. This is sources, primary, secondary data, abstract charts, this is, what am I gonna do?
It's in there, you listen to things,
Study. I told you, just take me a minute.
It works.
I said, just give me a minute. I go, I gotta put on paper. I'm like, my brain is connecting where?
Okay, so we're doing conversation is standards. So keys, concepts.
So this would be in here. So then you're just, in Jackson, that's where you went to school, these are 19 years. And we went to school. So we could retitle these. I just started to believe that. It was very distinct. So that this would be, you know, principles and processes of government. That this
they're
would be.
talking about like pieces
So
of
then it would
this,
actually.
making sure that we talk about this period of time, that we're addressing all of these actions, each of them is one of them, and then all the other ones is.
This would be, so you
We
go
don't
first.
know what to do with them.
Yeah, so you like pull and put it within the context of which. But see, this is not social science, it's certain.
And overview of
They're all still
your
teaching.
time period.
Out of that time.
Yeah.
It was easy to do this year in history classes where they don't have this, and everyone was making still
Yeah.
So I did that, I did this a
Yeah, it's sort of like,
Now, we
it
don't
doesn't
have
have to be
to
class,
so we
it
can
is
process
thinking,
all
behind
But
that.
since 2019, here, so that,
Missouri is moving,
it's,
right now,
So-
evaluating,
so like-
would always
so
talk about
honestly,
geography,
this is
not necessarily
contextualization.
having geography.
It's what it is.
No, you're right, it's an easy
Really
progression to
stop.
follow. That's what
Always
you do.
bring in geography.
Right.
That makes sense.
So you know what I mean?
So they're
You don't
aware
really
of
talk
all
about
those things.
science goes, and then
Not
you're
trying to
looking
separate
at
and silo into kind of that
conversation,
geography
and then you're
class.
looking at sourcing, you know, blah,
We're
blah,
gonna
blah,
do
but
that
you
geography
don't have to
as
leave
we
with
talk
that,
about
that's
the
what
concept
it is.
here.
Right, I was guessing, and that's, so that's what that is.
I think it's clean, easy, and.
I just don't think
And
we're
it
gonna
doesn't
get
require us to fill any other box.
people to think
Yeah, I mean,
that
it's
we're
really
gonna
easy.
just time here every year in the same.
Well,
What we're
But
trying to
the
do
goal
is
is, the actions,
last
the
year,
goal is to get them
reprioritizes the place. Like it still is honoring the content, but it's reprioritizing what you want. It's doing whether.
So for this, we want to.
Right.
You know, instead of getting it to
So.
Right.
Right.
I want to start, right, I want to start.
It's not even necessarily any way that
We start with the river valleys.
In one of the, it's not just.
Curriculum does
Right.
standard
It's
theory
kind of a blend,
with
so
the first
it's like you might do
they
declaration
don't go previous
a
to
little bit
that,
here,
so.
but you're gonna still
First
go
level
back
is
to the back
usually
and
like that.
another point, so that goes.
Around that time period. So,
But we're gonna have to
you know,
share everything.
Mesopotamia.
Well, there's time. That's me.
Chinese River Valley.
Right.
Uses
Yeah.
concepts and services.
So,
Calendar dictates it's.
I was like, 15 minutes, was the discussion.
Oh,
I know, I was just, I know, because you know, that's, I was processing out loud, I was hearing you, I thought, I was I'll be sure.
But when I think about all these different sections, now we're getting this.
Okay, and don't be sitting here.
I'm still not necessarily.
Feel free to fix it, but I do a processing, I'm like, okay, we're gonna take it now, that's right, I have to throw it all on there, and read it.
And then it's again, and in a year, that might be, we're studying 1,000 years.
No, I was like,
You and I are,
I was like, just give me a minute, I was listening now, you were a little skeptical.
We have a lot of people in that.
she's making some already.
Key concept, kind of, we're
No,
not,
I'm still,
time period,
trying
and here's how government time period, here's at the focus. No, I didn't.
Everybody,
I assumed you would.
I hope, you know, that everybody's thinking, and then we all sort of like generate some ideas, and there might be a crossover, you know, between our ideas. Because if everybody can do something different.
I've got it in my mind now.
Yes. This is really, this part right here is really the.
Right, but also you have the
Financial part, that part is the actual writing stuff, but if you don't do the brainstorming, your big
Well, see,
ideas,
this is very good, you
then
can.
nothing else is gonna work for that.
Besides just that. You deal with
I think that's
Yeah. Say yes, like, a lot of they want.
basically kind of a template.
Suggestion. Right, each subject matter has to be covered in that time. There's gonna be more some than others, right? There's gonna be some in certain communities, there wasn't as much government, not as much of that going on.
Alright,
But, that's just.
Yeah. What's really interesting is there's
Oh,
a department, any government in 6th and 7th grade, and 8th grade, boom. Like, we could probably.
Because you can put that.
And then how 8th grade, right now we're not really doing that. This is our chance to think about those goals and help everybody out. So we have
Kevin, about it, 'cause I know as an administrator, things that are measured, I need to be this very measurable.
I gotta get it down.
And explain it. So the teacher can look at that and go, okay, I need to pull out information from this time period. Key people, economics, trade, what happened with people groups, culturally, how do they people, how do they spread. That's how I see that. So,
we'll see how everybody sort of starts
but I think it's
sharing
simple,
ideas.
but it doesn't make it simple. And it allows for that creative ability just to inspire their kids with people, read, inspire their kids, and kids watch different. And this is one of those things, they're going to write it. Like, hear all this stuff about them. Right, so when I'm still watching my sister. So, it might be.
Well,
Especially with testing and fast-paced
saying
stuff,
this,
it can
we
be a
all
little
have
bit.
some history try to share information, but it's those rich details that make history interesting.
Right.
And the silo stuff, that it all comes out, and it's all this little thing, it's like this little island of information. I don't care about that, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, when you read a story, or you look at some rich content, the kids really do get interested in the details. The details that they can connect to, because they deal with that stuff. Like, we strip away all the interesting details too often.
Yeah.
And then it's boring.
And because of measuring facts. And I
This is
think that's,
why
and I'm like,
we put away the history books.
yeah.
The strategy a lot of our teachers are using is, okay, what does the history book say? What does the history book do? That's for giving us the basic information. So then we go to the primary sources, what people actually said and did, read those, and then we can go, okay, this is the whole the history book helps give us the timeline, but then we can go dive into the repeat of history.
The last couple of years in
Which is happy.
Central High, history books studies what is required.
I don't explain things.
Oh,
But it's
no, I
nice,
know.
it's your local and it's.
Well, here's, so,
Because I
we've
know
got
that I
here's
do all the time now.
documents
But
and
it's.
Yeah, I think when we get, and we're not a well-off district, but when we get more devices in the hands of kids, we can go out and search for those wonderful sources, and we won't even need a textbook. Right? We can do that work on it.
But you know, I find when I'm looking at computer screens, I don't retain what I'm reading near as possible. And I'm more easily distracted. I'm reading this, like I can read this little thing. And I'm just sitting there, and all of these noise are making comparisons brutal happen.
And here's the thing, as a teacher, we're gonna look at some sources, but I can only prepare so many sources. I don't know where our conversation is gonna go. I don't know if the kid is gonna want to read so-and-so's account to help them learn more. I can't anticipate all those things ahead of time, but I have, if a kid has a laptop or tablet, and we all agree, man, let's read this document, because that's where our conversation is. We can all go to it right then, and it eliminates that having to look up all these
I would like
papers.
to wash the machine. You know, my grandparents love toddlers that are and you know. But I think even with history, it's like, okay, we kind of grew up with the textbooks. It bored us to tears. And now we want to, but the things that we remember most is that we read on our own. That's what we remember more than, you know, our library just selections more than any history class, unless we have a non-history teacher. Oh, yeah. Right? And it's not always.
But I also worry.
Yeah.
They're not all like you,
We're
Brian.
trying to get our teachers trade books or, you know, classroom libraries with those primary sources and those accounts. Those are expensive. We spent last summer some $1.5 million in dealing with teachers. And even those books were delivering. So
I know what you're saying about the electronic, and I like it. Well, I like to have e-book. I like to have e-book. I like to have I don't do all the time. I can carry 1,000 books in here on my phone. All of the original sources. I've got the total. I got this.
you got a bunch of my blog.
Yeah. I got this one a few months ago, which has all these. This is great.
I just like being able to find.
I like being able to find things and reference and pull them. Electronic is fantastic.
Oh, we got rid of our.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. I communicated that to you. We have communicated that to me coming around.
Has everybody had a chance to take a break? My scone was require, the elementary group will be bringing snacks for everybody.
No pressure, Brian.
Yeah, I did the rest of the job description.
Sure.
They're bringing snacks, did you say that?
Yeah, they'll be bringing the snacks.
Wow.
Where are we gonna find
Well, that's because they're the,
I mean, sure.
Yeah, there is.
This keeps timing out, so. All that stuff.
Did we have well, the original mail? Okay, we'll just look at it and then I'll send it again to see if
Is
it's.
it a Google Doc? Like, is it a Google Doc or is it
No, I sent it.
a Word doc? Like,
It's a Word doc. Okay, that's right, that's right. We look. Okay, well, do it. Okay, we're gonna be sure you do. Weird, something or whatever, well, and know that this is correct. I'll try again. Let me just try again. You get it? Secret room is lovely. Cleaning it up a little bit. Okay, ignore the titles, and even don't look for room or anything like that, because we're processing. So what we did was, no, I was just explaining to you, so you know what we gave you. Do we wait? I'm going first. No. No, I was.
So,
Okay. So what we did was take pieces and thinking about the different strands. And since we said we are beliefs or what we value beliefs pieces, we gave them some. I know it's been so based on what I did, it was that. Jacket on and take it. So this would be social science. So that was trans elements. And there was one of those that had pieces about the other things. All of those is going to be then choose some time. Or like, so we say great for frequency pieces to do it. So there might be more to this than I want, but a little, is it dark?
We should have done too. I did bring down the lines of my computer. Looking at something that the matter goes out since when I was over here. You want the lights back on?
Because it's very mood and it was just a really kind of show. Can you just do one more minute?
Oh, there.
Yeah, it is for mine.
One in my house.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we're home, I'm like, ooh, there's so many choices.
So it should be another street, space that we want to but this is like.
Then they learn that something like consistency. Distance really good. No.
Yes, it could be, yes, it could be, because you might be analyzing research. And these are all the standards, it's not anything, these are source, these are standards. So they're.
Do we want to bring, I mean, just, do you want to kind of just explain this to everyone?
Well.
Well, we can talk about that, but I mean, this, we can title this, but this is where we see that piece.
Hey, just, do you guys mind, should we just, we'll decide how we want to go around, but do you want to explain to everyone, you know, I mean,
I don't necessarily need to go first, but I
no, you have to go first, but
Yeah.
whenever it's your turn, then you can kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is the exciting part, I think, and I don't think we could have done this without doing what we did yesterday and having discussions that we had. So I don't think that we would have looked at this document the way we just did if we had done that. So thank you for all of your thinking. This is the hard work, really, and I really tell you, Julie. We did, this is the big idea, the big sky work, and then we'll get down to the nitty gritty of writing, moving, adjusting things, and that will feel different, but this is really good. This is really good. So, we're gonna go around the room and share our big ideas, and we're gonna look for places that they fit together, and I don't know, do we still want to break for less 11:30? 11:30 is still a good time to stop for lunch? Okay, we'll see if we get there at 12:30. Larry. We're gonna start with Larry. And then we'll go this way.
Well, this was kind of, it was kind of a team effort, or sometimes two of us, sometimes three of us, and one of the first things that we noticed, you made a nice point, was cut and paste for people, groups, and culture, and social science inquiry, and it made, the verbs are static, whether it's sixth graders or 12th graders, they're still doing the same thing, they are locating, they're describing, there's no progression expected of the students, so our thought was there ought to be some different verbs in the later years compared to the earlier years. They should be able to analyze and evaluate and synthesize by the time they're in the 11th and 12th grade, not just locating and identifying. I think I saw in some other slips up there, other people think they want the same thing.
And that was specifically strands 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, that's right, there were 3 strings, I think, geographical studies, people groups, culture, and social science. Yeah, and the second one was on format, and that was really driven by what Kevin had said, which had to do with how do you present this to the audience? And the audience is the grades 6 through 12 teachers. So that should be the format that you had on the screen, or should it be something else?
Well, just in an effort to save time, I think we should just make it as user-friendly as possible, or whatever that ends up looking like. I think ultimately, when this gets in the hands of the people who have to use it, we can't leave any room for them to not understand what we meant. And I mean, very clear and concise. And I like the format where complete statements are written versus bullets, because the clearer we can be with people, the better. And I think we kind of agree on that.
And then Mary joined us, and I was talking about that particular layout up there, that format, and she suggested that might work well as an appendix, with the preceding pages being complete sentences. I get that right?
Well, what I was saying is that these graphic representations are very, very helpful when you do compare and contrast to see what we want. And there are going to be people who, just as we're discussing, want more depth and understanding what they're doing. And so this is like our working document that can be as an appendix to show how we connected the dots and came up with the content. However, what Kevin and Larry appreciated about the Ohio format is that because you were using sentence and paragraph form, there was more explanation as to how you interpret that. So I think this is extremely valuable for us, and we need to use it as the working document, the foundation. However, there are people who are going to find that bare bone and sparse and need more support. So that's where the format of the Ohio document comes in. Don't hate me, but I think we need both. And I think the working document can be an appendix in the back where you're going to need 3 sections. You're going to need the intro as to what it is we're trying to achieve with this philosophical underpinnings and the process that was used to come up with this. Then you're going to need, and that's in the Massachusetts document, done very well. Then you're going to need your standards, your content, and the themes, an explanation of what are the expectations under those things, and then they need to see what we see. That there are no holes because we were able to, in a very concise way, compare and contrast.
Any other thoughts? Those are our 2 contributions.
Are you like? I love how you hear somebody else say something and you almost read your mind. That's really awesome. Because like you were saying, we have more cohesiveness than we realize. And I was sharing that with Brian. I think he had one over too. I like this format because I like the bullets. I like to separate things out. But I think it's advantageous to have both, just like you were saying. Instead of, for me, instead of an appendix version, I think like when you hand that teacher something, she has, to me, I would have it all together. And so instead of it being like an appendix section with the standards all together, right? So on one page you have your, as you're saying, Ohio and Massachusetts did it as well. We have their written down, the paragraph, explanation. There's different types of brains for processing information. We want to be able to facilitate everybody's time thinking and what best fits them. And so I like combining both of that. So you hand your 6th grade teacher her packet, it's all together, and it's got both combination. It's got the paragraph form that explains that, and it's more wordy. And then it has the bullet points where she can mark off, I appreciate both of those together. So I thought combining those a good idea. I think our bio page 21 had an example of the overview as well. Ohio was just page 21. Yeah.
So to clarify, based on our conversation, that top versus grade 6, the theme for the year, and then there's a paragraph, sort of a narrative of the year, and its significance is when you talk about narrative and that explanation.
Yes. Yes. So I can read what it says.
Any other thoughts?
That's mine.
there's a nice context provided for that particular one. It's not just
Yeah.
all bullets, not saying it by itself, but there's context. That's nice to know.
I think for ease of instructions, the continuity and change, the actual topic should be moved more forward. So, that was part of it. And then I brainstormed with this group and, was amazed and confused at first. And then
So your first comment was,
just, I think that the actual topic of the study should have moved on.
Put the history stuff, like
Yes,
where.
like you're studying the colonialization of the New World, or you're studying the American Revolution, that should have more on.
That becomes the foundation.
Yes, the foundation.
Just
Okay, so I guess to kind of piggyback what Tia was saying is, if you pull that up, we were brainstorming over here just that, we talked about the verb things, and we talked about those core values, for lack of a better way to put it, that we decided on this morning. There was 5 things that we felt like we all had consensus needed to be in the documents, which in essence is the social science inquiry strand, albeit perfect as it is or not, that kind of is the piece that we're saying has to be there, and has to be a common thread throughout the curriculum or the standards 6 through 12. And so what we did, if you don't mind, sorry, the teacher and me, is we tried to create a template on how we could kind of shift and modify Brian's template a little bit so that all the strands are there with that core focus or that foundational focus at the top. So we took 8th grade as a sample because that's the cleanest and easiest to do. So let's pretend like the beginning of the year, we're talking about really colonization, independence, that time frame. We could call it whatever, not a big deal right now, but we just use that as an example. So there would be some kind of overarching or background statement up here related to that. The social science ideas that we have, those 5 things we agreed on, really came down to that there's key concepts and conceptual understandings that exist within this time frame under history, under government, under geography, economics, people groups, and cultures. So basically you're taking those standards and putting them here so that we're saying when we're talking about colonization and independence, these are key concepts and understandings that actually would be hit upon. And then when we called it evidentiary sources because we were looking at all the different phrases we had and those 5 things we agreed on. And so when we're talking about evidentiary sources, when I say sources, don't think primary or seminal sources. What we're thinking about is actually research, data, maps, graphs, charts. It could be a primary source or a secondary source. It could be a biography, whatever that is, we would pull those standards, and if it's directly related to the history, it would go here. If it was directly related to government, it would go here. So for instance, or geography. This time period is heavy geography because of the different regions of the colonies, and so you might have those actual geographic sources that you would use, maps, graph charts, that would be listed here, economics, so forth. And then this piece is the action that kids are being asked to take, or the civic engagement they might be asked to take with it. So how are they going to show their understanding of analyzing this information, synthesizing this information, and what are they going to do with it if under this time period they're doing something with it. So it might be a argumentative type of writing, it might be civic action, it might participation, if you will, or it might be that they're identifying the point of view or that kind of thing. Those standards are in there, you can pull them in and put them in the right category. So they're actually pulling this all together, you're seeing all the lenses within the context of this time frame. Now, this would happen for each chunk of time, or if this was geography, it might be regionally, this region, this region, this region, which could be mixed around the order in which they did it, but then they could see all the different lenses and then how the social science inquiry falls in as well. We felt like this was a nice blend of all of the documents that we had read and the values, those 5 values that we had. And, you know, Mary, you were talking about statements versus bullet points. You have both kind of going on here. And remember that we're not doing the curriculum, but this is kind of meshing it together a little bit more for those districts like Kevin's, where they might not have as many curricular resources, people needing to come in and work with teachers, and because you mentioned that earlier, but this is a place to start that's a lot more than what they had before, so we're trying to create that balance.
Yeah, there's a difference between support and micromanagement.
Right.
And you want to stop at support.
Right. But the thing that's unique about this is we're not picking certain standards that only go here. So let's use the Declaration of Independence, but might be, if you look through, it's going to be under the government strand, and looking at those pieces. You might find it here in this time period, the context of time, but you might also find it in another context of time. So teachers are starting to see that it's not just a running list, laundry list, that they're like, okay, I covered that. Okay, I covered that. That it doesn't go away. You know, that's right, it's actually kind of spiraling throughout the course of the course. And so are these lenses. So again, just a sample, don't look at typos or anything, because we are processing, creating visual or grammar. We're going to put ban on that to make sure. But we were trying to combine it together so you can kind of see what it would look like. And again, then we could actually put those pieces in where they go and work on the verbs. And in fact, I'm processing out loud right now, but it might even be beneficial if we decide that something like this would work before we work on the verbs to do that, because then we might see that we could actually go deeper with the verbs, because if we're connecting those lenses together, kids actually can go deeper with it than what we thought.
And Jessica, help me with this, because I think you're onto something here, but I want to pose a problem and see if you can, if this will solve it. One of the problems I have, and Dan brought it up yesterday, is that ideas actually take generations to develop, and what we see in our Constitution started with an analysis of the concept of republics back from Greek times. So what I'm seeing, or what I think is possible here, is that even though we're talking about the American Republic, if you do it over a period of time, and you keep that strand American Republic, you can see how it developed through time before it arrived at our Constitution. That is what is missing. That is the dots that aren't being connected in terms of we arrived here today because on the shoulders of people from
I think a key word that Jessica said was spiral. This is something that comes back around, and with this, I think
This is your
it's
chance
an opportunity
to create that contextualization too, moving in. So these chunks give you that chance to kind of create that contextualization. And that's just as you see contextualization, you see continuity and change, you see causation, and you have sourcing going on here, you have action going on. And if we keep, you can use this format in 6th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade, even high school, but we use 8th grade because it was the cleanest and easiest and everybody's the most familiar with, to get the sample real fast and kind of hash it out.
But what it does is instead of plopping the books of John Locke and so forth into a cell in this grid, you start seeing in time how it penetrated down to influence people.
Yes, so it's not
Yes.
relegated to that one
Right.
bit on the timeline. Declaration of Independence, 1776, great. 1860, Lincoln is referencing Declaration of Independence. It's coming back, it's spiraling back.
Yes.
And you can see it develop.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was sitting with Brian and he said, you know, look at this, they're not connected. I said, they're not connected. How do you expect the students to connect?
Yes.
Now, I will say, we hashed around on this because this is teetering on curriculum a little bit, but I think by keeping it this way and putting the standards in, we still, because the fact of the matter is, I don't care who you are, the time periods and help me here too, Larry, at the higher ed piece as a historian, political scientist, there's key periods that everybody agrees on. Whatever you call them, it doesn't matter. There's still chunks of time that everybody, and even as parents, you would agree that there's kind of some shifts in what's happening. So whatever we don't even have to give it a name, we can give it just a content statement and have a paragraph, whatever, we can make that decision, but this is just saying, hey, you know what? Nationally, even internationally, these are agreed upon chunks of shifts in philosophy, time, chronology, whatever, trends, patterns. We're identifying them to make it a little bit easier to process. And then for districts who need it, and that is now starting to show how everything ties together. Without being agreed on.
Okay, we'll have if it's a clarifying statement, let's keep moving to that, and we will have a chance to give everybody a chance to talk, and then we'll go back and really sort of pick apart this if we like this format. So key comments, just really quick clarifying comments we do at this time. That I'm excited about. Give everybody a chance to speak their ideas before we let one.
Are we moving around?
Yeah.
Ideas, so
So,
you're up there.
yeah.
I forget about myself.
She was over here.
Really talked a lot about this same idea, the idea of our static verbiage. And the only thing I would add is in my brain it was making sense to at least have 2 layers, because the way our courses are taught, a middle school expectation and then a second high school expectation. But I noticed this and feel like this is something, if we do nothing else, I think we can do this and make tremendous gains in our standards. And then I also was lamenting in the Jackson Create chart that when I look at standards documents arranged the way most are, where they're not in any way linked to a unit of study. As a teacher, I think in terms of a unit of study, or at least periodization. And so I was complaining about the fact that this is better, I can see 6th grade, but it still doesn't help me think in terms of my world as a teacher. So it really then prompted Jess to solve that problem for me.
Processing on that.
As a teacher, what I think this adds to teachers is it allows you to anchor the requirements in a framework that you understand. So I understand what colonization to independence means in my brain, and therefore whatever's typed in there has more meaning to me, and I feel better prepared to deal with that in some way. But that was my on this.
I have nothing else to add. Most of the ideas I think were kind of incorporated in Jessica. So, stated. I'm excited that this uses skills, content research skills. So I always appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate your work and trying to think through how we can layer this out. I 100,000% agree that time periods help to give context to our standards, and they help us to break things up. And we just make a list with them. It's really hard to know what is going on. It just doesn't flow very nicely. And so chunking that up breaks up the course a little bit and allows us to have some goals for each one. Knowing what it felt like to cut and paste things, I will just state my thinking that there are a whole lot of geography, economic, and culture strands in our current standards, a whole lot, and we won't be able to plot all of them in every unit. It will look, the chart will be ginormous, and so we will just, my first belief will need to give places to practice each of those thinkings, not ever limiting a teacher, knowing that they'll need to do all of them throughout the year, and they can make connections that are different, but we're going to have to limit what geography, economic,
concept and a whole page of geography strands for every single period, which is going to be look really full and messy. So that's just my thinking. We're recognizing here limiting columns helps. Just having a format, having columns, you can start to put a whole lot of information in there. So what you may recognize is this is recommending that in this format we have government, whatever we call that, as a column, rather than trying to separate out process of government systems and then that there's one government.
Be careful with the titles. I just threw that up as a placeholder. Know that we could tweak any of that. I just leave it there. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to be noticing that we're to make all those connections clean and easy. We have government. And I think that can be done and still hold to all our values that we're holding to. So, okay, good.
What everyone else said, I think, tell them what you can tell them what you told them, real important. And that top folder, the top placeholder, what you're saying with the Massachusetts, that kind of an overview. Here's the goal of what we're doing. This is what we're trying to cover in a language, person-friendly kind of way. Oh, I got what you're talking about. We're trying to get out of this course in this here. And then this, I think, fixes what was frustrating me and Julie and Jamie mentioned also. We need a timeline. We need to be able to see, or exactly prehistory, exactly classical, what are we looking at with there? And being able to spiral it up, I think, is really good. The Colvin part, once you've got through, may need to still be tacked on there. Kind of what we had in the previous. I don't know, do we need an appendix or something like that? We'll see that as we go through. But language, especially like what we had in the previous, if you look at the standards as they are now, there's a lot of kind of words that are there and catch your eye and tell you nothing. And what we kind of felt that would participate and so forth involves the student and the teacher using an idea of what you're trying to get to. There's something happening here. You're not just cattling off particular words and topics. So, I think that's the direction.
I'm just stating it because I know how hard it is to figure out by this machine. Several things jump out at me. I appreciated where Jessica was going and where you're coming from as a teacher. And I think what you're saying is probably taking more depth from what I'm getting ready to share. Dan shared it. And when I see history, I don't, when I look at a lot of these standards, and I'm coming from an objective point of view because, again, I'm not in a classroom and I don't have all the accountability paperwork and all that you all deal with. But I see a lot of cumbersome, loaded down, mumbo jumbo when I look at it. And I think we need to kind of give it some wings to fly, to be honest. And for me, if I were doing this, it wouldn't be, I appreciate this right here, and I think it's a good, very good layout. Again, I like what Jessica had to say a lot. And I like the spiral, because you have to review, you need to, because a lot of kids are getting it, who knows if they had not done that. And so you need that review, it's important. But I would never do it that way. I think history should start out with years and time periods. And then you put your subjects, you put your coursework or your disciplines underneath those years. So you have 4,000 BC to 1,000 BC, and you put geography, and then you put economics, and then you put government, which there wasn't a whole lot of studying in that area. but you understand what I'm saying. I would put the disciplines in relationship to the time period. And so the school, especially in relation to high schools can decide what grade level they want to do that. But if you have a geography class and you have a history class, your high school can say the freshmen have to take geography, economics, and history, and maybe it can be one class. I don't know how you do it. They're going to cover those subject matters in this time period, and then you grow. You go to the next time period, and then the next time period. But you can always piggyback on the previous time periods as you do that in this spiral fashion. So you're doing as you add content, grow in depth of knowledge, you are still able to input previously studied things. You're just not putting as much emphasis on those things this year. And you know, I think what I'm trying to say. But so I think we're kind of all in a very interesting place because we're thinking the same thing. Like there's something missing with a lot of these standards when I'm reading, and I think and when I heard words cohesive and how do you get cohesive, you get cohesive by numbers, years, and then you can go in these years, who are the influential people? And some people may say that's list, but and then you learn the economics from that year, and those kids really get that time period. They're grounded in it because it's heavily studied instead of kind of all this class is studying this right now, this class is, and it's just kind of drive-by and these random strands. And I see that happening with my kids in school right now. I'm just kind of like, do you have a foundation for why you're studying this and this? And it's not a very good foundation. And I think that makes sense to teachers what years they know, okay, I'm studying the classical era right now, so I know I need to pick out economics from here, history from here, if you have one teacher who covers all of that. Or if you have several teachers, so as they get older, they have maybe more classes in that depth, and so their depth of knowledge goes, does that make sense?
And I think, I'm sure I'm across it as you talk, so there would be a year marker, so this would be one band of history.
Okay.
Down, instead of doing it by course, it's by the topical, like history, econ.
Well, and I think you all do a better job of implementing more in depth how that might look on a chart. But if I were to chart it, the years would be on top.
Right.
That to me makes the most sense to go, we're looking at these years. So what did economics look like? What did history look like? What did cultures look like? What did, how did people move? What caused people to move during this time period? And then that progression naturally happens to the next time period. And it's not complicated. And then as they grow in depth of knowledge, you are, that fluidity just naturally happens, I think. And I think teachers would have the ability then to have some flexibility. We're not being it's not micromanaged. And it's opening up dialogue in the classroom to get kids interested. When kids are interested, they're going to write. And they're going to write better for the colleges. And I think part of the problem why they're not writing is because they're bored teachers in history classes in public schools today. I hate to say that, but I think that's a part of the problem unless you have good history teachers. And that's, I don't want to say they're all not good, but maybe a better word is you connect. I think it's like maybe you connect with that teacher. Sometimes it's just a matter of connecting, that's what's good.
Does this capture better what you were?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And to me,
Is that, and sorry.
And as a teacher, Jamie, does that make more sense to you? Because you talked about timelines or time periods, categorizing things, so then I'm going to implement the economics for this time period. We're going to talk about the economics, and then we're going to talk about history. Go ahead.
I think that I see, asking does this make sense? It does to a degree. The problem is that we offer discrete courses. And so it's, as a teacher, it's more clear for me to have a time construct, but link specifically to the course I'm teaching. Where a world history course actually is typically arranged very similarly to this, and if we're looking at a world history, course document, that really is what it does. But I do also want a delineation between world history, American history, government, for the sheer practicality that there are so many historical examples that I want to to be able to say, okay, colleague who is doing American history, I really want you to be responsible for this, and I want to be responsible for this, because I don't want people pulling the same examples for our students. So I think at some level, the course separation is important.
Well, and also just that when you teach
But
this,
I like the chronology,
I think chronologically that is just the way the world works. We live on a calendar. But also, there might need to be an understanding that as we're writing standards and creating new tests, we actually might be shifting how we teach a little bit. And that there needs to be an ability to do that. Teachers have been so loaded down and so micromanaged in recent years with No Child Left Behind, that it has clogged their flexibility, freedom. And so it may be that there's an adjustment in how we teach. And if there's some collaboration going on with you and the geography teacher, so you're not covering the same things, there should be some collaboration in the social studies department over that, I think.
All right, let's make sure, no wonder if they limit discussion on let everybody speak, and then we can have open for it.
This is actually my curriculum, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm and your ideas in that. But when we are covering 4,000 to 2,000 BC, in that short time period, there's a Chinese culture, there's a Mesopotamian culture, there's an Egyptian, there's an Indus River Valley as well. So the problem is we do live by a calendar now, but that's not the way societies existed or started to exist. So at the same time, there's civilization, we also have the Icen and Otzi, who's still in the Neolithic period. And we have Sub-Saharan Africa, which is in the Paleolithic era. So it would be, if all of society was on the same track, that might work. But because we're all over the board, and because history, as I always tell my students, when they want to do the Venn diagram, they want it to all line up, history is not nice and neat, it's the real world. And so, unfortunately, it doesn't. So by doing it by topics instead, or by societies, then we're able to cover everything in a way that makes sense to the kids. Because if I'm covering Egypt, Mesopotamia, all of this at the same time, it's going to fry their little minds. They are not going to want it.
I'm wondering if we're balancing on that splitting point between framework and the classroom activities. As a framework, we can summarize generally, we would say in this era, whether we're talking classical as a whole or Athenian, we want to be covering this part. And in the classroom, then you can say, okay, this happened in 350 BC, and this happened in 250 BC, and here's that timeline in particular. I would hope that's happening in the class, but if we try to put that at the framework level, I'm just trying to imagine we're back to 36 pages would be a long, wistful, happy memory. We'd be up into hundreds trying to get this out. I'm hoping that in some way we can, if it's not obvious, get that idea across. You need to be looking at this in the times and show how things progress from one point to another. But I don't think we can reference that in a general way, other than this era and this area comprise this
But
area.
I would think it would be general, and then I would think you could have your schools can determine what age they want to teach this time period. And I think American history at some form, or civics, can be taught every year. That's somewhere.
I'll put an order, we give everybody a chance to speak once so that we can get everybody's thoughts.
Mary is actually speaking.
Larry was first, we didn't have Zuba.
Mary commented on did you actually get to make your
He asked her to jump in because they were in the same discussion. It is lunchtime, so unless you got like a really quick comment, we don't want to cheat you. Would you like to start with you after lunch? Or do you want to have a quick word?
I just have a couple of things to say. The New York standards might be addressing what Julie was talking about, and so you can take a look at that for a format to see if it resolves some concerns from both parties. The other thing, I keep going back to the 7 standards here, and I haven't figured it out yet, but I just want to make sure that the 7 standards are represented, not necessarily in 7 columns across that grid, but that we are sure to address all of these seven standards at every grade level within the framework that we use. I think, everything that needed to be said was said, and, I'm grateful.
Okay, so we've been gracious to put all our ideas there, and we'll open the floor for general discussion after lunch. So we think about thoughts, if you need to write them down so we forget, or leave again. Let's come back at 12:35 for a break.
And you're welcome to leave stuff in the room, I will stay here.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
The same cafeteria as yesterday.
Are we doing an hour lunch?
Yeah.
You want anybody like to
Unless anyone wants
drop
to
off
short it.
their lunch order, because I think I'm going to have to.
Same here, or we get to parking garages.
I'm told that this is the last meeting we're gonna get, coupons, is that correct? So that's what this meeting is going to be.
Save the money time.
Okay, well,
It's not a date line. It's not a date.
So this is to use when you give additional down this way, you can square it back, that's the right size.
You guys are.
Actually, we're going to, we're going to
More in depth, but you guys should be in depth. But I guess.
All that's going on.
I'm going to go next to.
You guys are.
So, but there's no reason why after you do Chinese, you go to and then go back. So this is what I've been found about, like, world history is required course. World history is not
And they can
required.
figure out how to do that on a graduation level, so you see that those are the names are in graduation.
History from here, yeah.
So maybe taking people from here,
Government.
you know, and we can talk about it anytime, we can't cover
Instruction,
it. So we can only cover
the U.S. history, Constitution, and American history.
and all those things as
As
far as
American history.
standards.
And then we get to
Well, how
world
much
history is not required.
they want to emphasize your,
Well, I think it's.
what's the word I'm gonna use?
Not required focus.
Actually,
You know, there are more depths which have done.
they want to know,
Yeah.
they have that for
And then they did American history in 2 years. And going back, you know, 6 courses, my parents in American history, but then they did away with our way, you know, we had 9 years. Actually, we had exams. And we know that there are other districts that are students, so they have more. Take it as seriously, so just.
No, I'm just kidding.
We had, some people suggest maybe we should do that, and said, yeah, we'll have people for that. I'm not doing it. It's ridiculous, just for a test, and boy, do they feel silly now that we're getting back to it. But they did, what they did is they did.
sorry, I've got just 2 points. Are you somebody reading these up, maybe? Do you want?
Oh, I might, I'll run over if you want.
Oh,
Or both.
Yeah, and whatever.
They want to, because what they did is they got the 3 years history, the 9th and 10th grade was history. So then they took that American history, you'll see after 3 years.
Sure, that was a rich experience, but a narrow experience.
Well, and was it just, I mean,
That's the state board's decisions, and that document comes out.
this one, yes, I think it's, I'm looking at Emerson Flight. On the DESA website.
Yes.
For instance, this is the graduation.
Yes, I think we're good at Madison's.
But again,
Yeah, now we're seating.
Emphasis. Now here's, all right, here's a question I have, and I disagree with my boss. So of course I lost on this. I interpret the state law saying that students must pass a test on Missouri and US
Bread and
government.
olive oil and
history. He says, now, it's just on the Missouri and US Constitution. Or he said, I have no notes now, but, yeah, and they call it the Constitution test, you have to pay to pass the Constitution test. But if you read the law, it says in American history, and they interpret it to be American history related to the ratification of the Constitution. And maybe that was practiced, but that's not what it says.
I didn't understand what you just told me, because I missed the first part.
All right, I understand that there's controversy over the law, the language in the law regarding the requirement that kids have to pass the Missouri Constitution test.
Well, if you look at every district, every student is supposed to pass the, traditionally we call it the Constitution test.
And that is locally designed.
That is locally designed,
So
that's
there's
correct.
a certain craziness about that to begin with.
That's true. And the EOC does not do away with that, it's separate from the EOC.
Right.
But when you read the law, it says the institution, it says like the Constitution institution and of, like the US Constitution and American history.
So it seems like it's saying that the EOC,
No, it seems like it's saying that the test every student has to graduate, it has to be on history and government, not just government.
not just government.
But my boss said, don't, he was one of those, don't change anything. And he said, nope, that means American history about the ratification. I was like, no, that's not what it says, but, he said, you don't wanna go to the principals and tell them they have a different
Could
test.
you read out or state again from memory what the law's language says?
Find it. I will find it. See, and my problem is I go to the law. I say, this is what the law says.
That's the right thing to do.
Well, no, there's also a law that says that the State Board of Education will maintain a list of publishers, and districts that are looking to adopt resources will get a list of publishers from the State Board of Education. And I asked them for that list, and they did not know what I was talking about.
So they are not in compliance with.
And I even gave them the statute number, and they didn't know.
Well, do we really want them to be doing that?
Well, legally, there are certain legal, for textbook, like there's a law that says that I can't pay less for a book than you pay. It's all part of the same law.
But I can't pay less for the same book.
Right, so if I buy the Americans,
Yeah.
I can't pay less, I can't, because I'm a bigger district, I can't negotiate a lower price.
I understand.
But it doesn't say anything about how many I can get for free. It's true. Sorry, I'm the person who, like, I'm known as, well, I won't tell you what I'm known as, but I'm the one who deals with all publishers and all the resources.
Well, but we have to do that, and luckily, my secretary has been deeply involved with purchasing over the many years that she's worked in our district, so she was invaluable, of course, to me, as a reviewer, certainly in the social studies textbook adoptions, and I've never been through anything on quite such a massive scale. I mean, we probably spent over $250,000, and we probably, we adopted the 11 different courses, and when you add in the electronic platform aspect of many of those texts, it's almost like doubling the number of texts.
Oh, wait, now it says, now here's another place in it, hold on, where I'm looking, oh no, this is, never mind, this is for the, this is, never mind. If you want a college prep certificate, you have to have those.
College prep certificate.
Yeah, here's
So,
another,
what do you mean?
well, we graduate, what's it called? Requirements for the college preparatory study certificate. So we graduate and you can get that too, that's an added something
From the state.
from your district.
There's a certificate that goes along with your diploma.
Yeah, here it is, yeah, my son's getting one of these. And it's, you have to have 3 units of social studies, 4 of commerce, you have to have 4 of math instead of 3. And you have to have, then everything else is the same.
have to have 3.0 grade point average. And be above the mean on the ACT. You have to have attendance of 95%. It looks like it's like A plus, kind of. Dual credit. So it does say for social studies. So maybe that's what people are saying. I'm going to have world history. Well, that's for this. Today's going really well, but we're still not looking at the standards. We're halfway into day 2, and we still have not looked at the standard. And I understand they keep circling around because they're trying to get rid of that republic, that, you know. And so now it looks like what they're trying to do is put it as government or we just did away with that, it's called civics.
So you find the language for, okay, what you're saying that is interesting for me is that I know that Parkway provides 2 kinds of diplomas. Maybe what it is, I mean, you can get a diploma from a high school, and then you can get what's called a Parkway diploma, and this is for kids who went through, who have a transcript with modified credit on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if they don't get that college prep certificate, because they aren't really college ready.
I don't know, because I don't know. I think the college prep certificate, I think that's Springfield.
Oh, just for.
No, I mean, that's Fairgrove. We don't live in Springfield district.
So this is Fairgrove. Fairgrove. Okay, so this is a local.
No, but this is, I was just reading DESI requirements, but maybe some of your smaller districts, because, I don't know, we don't have AP courses in our district.
I have never heard of the thing you're talking about. So you say it has been around. I just
Maybe the bigger districts don't know what
Yeah.
I'm going to run cons.
It is a huge.
Let's see, I'm looking for the. Yeah, it's doing much better, but I will say that we're still getting bogged down to the, I guarantee you, well, I won't say it. I think if we go on to Rockwood's curriculum, that's what that thing would just stop there. That's probably what it's gonna look like. And I think that they're, which there's nothing wrong with it, but I'm just saying, that's what I think it is. Statutes. Let's go to. Okay. All right, here we go. Here's the sentence. No pupil shall receive a certificate of graduation from any public or private school other than private trade schools unless he has satisfactorily passed an examination on the provisions and principles of the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Missouri and in American history and American institutions, period.
Sounds like a third test. Doesn't that sound like 3 separate tests? U.S. Constitution?
Well, but it says and in American history, it's and of the state of Missouri, comma, and in American history and American institutions. Well, but it says, no, it says pass an examination. But what I'm saying is that test has to have questions on American history too.
On it.
Okay, good
Read it one more time.
No pupil shall receive a certificate of graduation from any public or private school other than private trade schools unless he has satisfactorily passed an examination on the provisions and principles of the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Missouri, and in American history and American institutions.
All right now, my understanding is that the US Constitution test is not the same as the Missouri Constitution test. We do two separate tests.
But it says an examination. You mean in your district?
Yes,
But we just,
you combine them.
it says an examination. We have a constitution test. Now, I interpret that American history, I have some historical questions on there, but they all have to relate to the Constitution. They have to do with, like some of the, like the Federalists, they would have to do with, maybe, the, Three-Fifths Compromise, I mean, those kind of questions, so they're
So you have
historical.
one test, everybody uses it.
No. I have a test which I make available, but here's where the students have to pass this test in order to graduate. And I work with teachers to develop a test. It's online, and kids can take it as many times as they want. There's just one test. And if they cannot pass it, teachers have the ability to make the modifications they feel are necessary for their students, up to and including providing an alternate test. Wink, wink. It's a kid who can't pass it.
I understand that, but right now,
I mean, I have kids that-
anybody can make up a test for their class.
It can be 10 true false questions. It can be open note, it could be open book, it can be cooperative learning. It could, it could be,
There's no constraint, there's no oversight, there's no regulation.
There's no regulation. Then there was recently, somebody came up with the bright idea that we want everyone to pass the citizenship test instead, the US citizenship test.
Oh, right.
And our criticism is, wait a second, that's just rote memorization. Why is it important that I know there were 9 Supreme Court justices? It's more important I be able to apply the rights and responsibilities of the Supreme Court and their role in checking and balancing that. I mean, that's more important. So there was then I got this call from our public information person, and they said, hey, can we come interview you? And I'm like, I was just like, hey, bad hair day, I don't want to do a TV interview, but okay. So they came over, and I had in my hand a copy of our Constitution test. And I said, we already do this in the district. This is our test. So literally, there's on TV this woman standing there with this maybe a Constitution test. I'm like, whoa. I mean, it's just, but because they have people saying, oh, there's no test, exactly like, here it is. Here's the test we give. And it was developed by teachers. It's a very, we have given several of them. I mean, we've written several, but when I first came to the district, we did not have, and everyone did their own. And the first thing I said, let's develop a common test. And everybody send your test to me, let's see. And some of them, you would not believe.
They would accuse me of micromanaging, by the way.
Well, but here's what I did though. I said, you do not have to restart.
So the US Constitution test and the Missouri Constitution test is just locally grown. And it should have some bearing history. Where did you read that from?
Oh, I restarted my computer because it keeps wanting to restart. I'll look it up and really turn it on. It's Missouri and there's Bill. It's Missouri revised statutes. But I had some teachers, they showed me their 100 question test. Basically, you don't pass my test, you don't graduate. No, they get the kids and they're all boasting about how they get the kids all paranoid and studying. Here's the thing, come on. Them memorizing how many constitutions the state of Missouri has had? Is that meaningful? Is that meaningful? So I helped craft against stiffest resistance a different kind of test. And again, nobody tracks it, I don't care what they use. But if anyone comes to me, here's a district test for you to use. And the district test has graphs, charts, maps, it's a lot of interpretation, primary sources. I got a lot of the questions off of me. And what I did is I pulled a lot of the government questions and then we sat around and they revised them. And we put them in a bank.
Out to lunch.
Yeah, we're sitting here, we're talking about Missouri revised statutes.
Okay.
And my interpretation is a constitution test
Mhm.
needs to include American history.
Needs to include American history.
Because it says, US Constitution, read
That
the,
is so.
but
it's-
that's what it says.
It's just,
But that's
and
what it
it's
says.
institutions and da.
Comma, American history and American
Well,
institutions.
it's mixed in there, and that's where they got the idea that, that American history is required.
No, it's in, it's a American history. Oh, you mean,
No, it's required by law, that's where you get the legal justification for everybody having to take American history.
well, some people, they're sitting here, they're talking about world history is required. World history is
It's
not
no history
required.
never been required,
But of course, we can't say anything, so I'm just sitting there while they're going off talking
Yeah,
about requiring
it's
world
never
history.
been required.
Where are the revised statutes to say about should have been handled?
Sure.
Let's see if I can
So
speak
that's
up.
kind of long.
I had to restart
You
it.
guys have a copy of the glossary, or the access to glossary?
We did that early on.
Yeah.
What we want to know is, in the intent of this document, what's bold mean? Is that introducing
Bold,
the?
no, the bold is actually referring to the glossary.
Right.
Anything.
So it's just
Sorry, I
in the
need to-
glossary. It
My
doesn't mean
computer has all
mass
these
or
installing
updates
updates
or
and
anything. So once it wraps it,
Oh,
It's just something means.
oh, so all of this conversation is part of the public. I'll have to read
where it's cool, it's just referring to, if you want an explanation of this code glossary.
Right, but
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're putting in different,
it has both of those terms defined
good deal.
Yeah.
Okay,
in the glossary.
okay, so we were applying different meaning to what
Yeah,
that meant.
yeah.
Okay, good deal.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure.
Anyway, we're having fun. I mean, we still haven't started talking about the standards.
Oh, gosh.